Hi everyone, we've got a beach scene today. It's this one just here. It's a nice simple draw. You've got a straight horizon line coming straight across about a third of the way down. You've got a hill line. You've got the beach, it comes slightly up here and slightly down here, and just a rough idea of where those few shrubs are on there. Then I want you to bring a water's edge down. Now I haven't come up to here, I've kept it coming further down to the corner of the page. Then I've popped in a few gentle waves and I've masked those out very unevenly, so I don't want you to use the same thickness of line when you're masking out. I just want you to dab in places, vary the pressure so you get a difference in line, and then you have a few delicate dabs on these here as well, a few here. So it's basically the bits of white you can see that I want you to try and capture. Then I want you to draw just where the water is showing on the beach, so just where you've got an idea of where that is, so that when we come to paint you know where you're going with that. Colours wise, I've just got the colours for the sky here to start with. Cerulean blue, cobalt blue, then cobalt blue and burnt sienna, and a tiny touch of rose. Okay, so I'm going to come in with some water on the sky first of all. You can come over those distant hills. This is actually from the coast of Scotland, so which is why you've got these distant hills over that other side. I'll put on the description what lock it was, or what inlet. I think it was an inlet, this one. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, so with my round number 10, is just pick up a tiny touch of rose. Just bring that through a little bit. It's just going to make the sky a little bit more interesting, just towards the horizon. There's a little bit of a glow. And that's going to bring that in. Rinse my brush, dab off. I'm going to come into the cerulean blue. And just again bring that through. So this is just above the rose now. I'm going to bring a bit just below the rose as well. It's a nice simple sky today. Then come into the cobalt blue. That's a bit stronger towards the top. This is just the horizontal strokes, just blending it through, just letting it settle on the paper. What you don't want is just have total stripes, so make sure you blend through a little bit. And then the other thing you can do is you can lift the paper and just let it run a little bit. You don't want it to run too much, you don't want it to look like rain, but it just helps blend so that you don't get those solid blocks of colour. You can go both ways. It'll settle in nicely. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's dried nicely now. I'm going to come in with my round number 10 and just on these distant hills pop a little bit of water. And then with my round number 6 just going to pop in a little bit of cobalt blue. It's always good to use the sky colour because that helps give the real sense of distance. And then I've got that grey that's made up with the cobalt blue and burnt sienna, so I'm just going to pop a little bit of that in places. Don't eliminate all of the blue, just want a little bit just in places. It'll give a really nice subtle effect that there's those distant hills. Okay, I'll dry that off. Okay, so that's dry, so I'm coming to wet this far side now again with my round number 10. And then I'm going to bring a bit of water into the trees as well. And then what I've got is a bit of neat raw sienna on my palette. So what I've done is I've dipped my brush into the water, make sure it's nice and full of water first, then dipped into the neat raw sienna. I'm going to come along and just start to create this dry sand bit and bring some into the trees and shrubs just at this edge. With my brush still got the raw sienna on, I'm dabbing into a little bit of cobalt blue. Just to start to get a green effect happening here. I don't want to make much of these shrubs. They're there. I want to make sure they look green. So if when you pop those on you think, oh, they don't look too as green as I would like them to, then dab into a bit more raw sienna. Give my brush a bit of a rinse. I'm going to come into the grey, which is the burnt sienna and cobalt blue. Just start to bring some of that in. You just want to make sure you don't eliminate all of the raw sienna, especially towards that top edge. A few little grey bits just on the top there. I'm just letting that dry just a little bit. I'm just trying to wait for the sheen to go off just a little bit and I can come back in with a bit more. This is just the grey again. Just trying to darken up the places. That bottom edge there. bit of an edge there as well. Okay, I'll dry that off. Okay, I've just dried that off. I'm just going to bring in a little bit more just to make sure that I've got a nice contrast there. So this is the grey again. Just coming along this bottom edge, varying the pressure of the brush. You don't want the line to be too straight. And it's just highlighting that contrast there. Just bring the photograph just this way. It's quite a lot of shadow. A bit of shadow coming in here. A bit more dark there. A few little bits of dark on the horizon. A little line there. And then I'm dabbing into a little bit more of the raw sienna and a touch of the cobalt blue. And we're just going to build a little bit more definition on these shrubs. So there's a mix of both colours on the brush. I've not mixed them together, so they're varying as I'm applying them. So dab into the raw sienna, and the other side dab into the cobalt blue. Okay, I'll dry that off. That's nice and dry. What we're going to do is we're going to tackle the beach first and then we'll tackle the water after. So we'll do it in two sections. What I've done is I've mixed up some more cobalt blue and burnt sienna. It's a slightly more brownier grey, just slightly over, so I've just slightly a little bit more burnt sienna. In that mix then I've split it into two and then put a touch of rose into one of those mixers. So I've got, it's cobalt blue and burnt sienna to make that browny grey, and then a touch of rose, and that's taking it to this wet sand colour as well. I've also still got that dab of raw sienna on my palette and plenty of cobalt blue to go at. Cobalt blue tends to work a little bit better than cerulean, but if you're worried you can use a bit of cerulean. The cerulean will stay put better. I tend to like the cobalt blue better because it doesn't granulate as much. So there's my cobalt blue. Okay, so we're going to go on to the beach. You need a layer of water. You're coming up to your masking fluid right the way to your water's edge. You need a good layer of water on here. You don't want it to be puddling, but you need it to be wet enough that it stays wet while you're doing the whole section. So take your time, come over it twice. You're going to start with the blue, and even if the blue runs further, I don't want you to panic. So try as much as you can to create that horizontal stroke. It's going to make all the difference. If you come slightly over your masking fluid, don't panic. So I'm using my round number 10. I'm coming along where I know the water's going to be. If at any point you want to move your paper to make it easier, do that. So what I'm going to do now is start to bring those strokes out where I can see them. So that's why I drew all those pencil lines in. If I come over some of those pencil lines, it's an impression of we're going for. Don't worry too much about it being wholly accurate. As you come down, the angle changes slightly. It's quite horizontal to start with, then it changes. So just make sure you've got that angle changing. I'm just going to dab into a little bit of the raw sienna. You want to keep this well away from the blue. You're just capturing where those lighter areas are in the sand at the bottom. There's a little bit at the top here as well. Brush and rinse. Then I'm coming into that reddy colour. So remember, impression of. This is like the infill colour. The grey is the one that's going to bring it all together. Don't eliminate all that raw sienna. You want some of it to show through. Make sure you get to that edge. The drier your brush is, the less the colour will flow. So you can always dab off if you're worried. You can drop down to a number 6 if you're worried as well. So I'm going to drop down to number 6 now, and then come into the grey mix. Make sure I give it a good stir. Now I can start to add the shadow. So this is what pulls it all together. So you're just going to follow the direction of those shadows. And you go in impression of. I have to come round this side. Quite a lot of shadowing down here. Okay, where I've got that line there, I'm going to rinse my brush, dab it off on the kitchen towel, and just soften in there. So I've just got a hard edge because that bit's dried a bit quicker. It's got to be a damp brush rather than a wet brush. That just helps that soften in. Make sure you capture some of this edge where the wave is. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I've dried that really well. I'm just very quickly going to get in this side. The beach will come together when we do the glaze, so I'm going to teach you how to do a glaze today. So don't panic if it looks a bit multicoloured, it will all come together. So you want plenty of water on your water. Then you're going to come in with the cobalt blue. You're just looking at your tonal element really now, so just making sure that it's not so much the detail of the waves, we're going to do that later. It's just the tonal elements. So you cover the whole thing with cobalt blue. And you've got a touch of the beach colour coming in, and then a touch of grey towards the top. So I'll give a little bit of a rinse. I'm going to bring in, so where your waves are rippling, that tends to be where it would kick up a bit of sand, so we're going to pop a bit of that through. There might be a little bit showing through down at the bottom. And then just pick up a bit of grey and do that towards the horizon line. So I've got my number 6 now. I'm just going to bring in a little bit along that horizon line. Then you can pop in a few bits of shadow. Okay, so that's all dry now, and that should now give you a good base to work into. If you've got a small flat like this, that's going to make it helpful now. If you haven't, I don't want you to worry, you can still do this sort of brush stroke with a round number 6. What I want you to do is to start to create some of the darker waves or ripples. So if you're watching the angle that I've got the brush at, that's important. It's going to start to create those ripples without you actually having to do too much. So I'm working this section here, and again it's an impression of, doesn't have to be exact. You can do this with a round brush, it would still work quite well. Just vary the pressure of the brush. The flat just makes it just a little bit easier. Except the camera just get in the way a little bit, the tripod. You just can start to create these ripples in the water. You can also come underneath the bits of white foam that you're going to have in there. So it's just about varying the pressure of the brush. Concentrate on the ones that are in this 4 section, not so much of the ones at the back. I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of definition there later. So this one's quite important here. It's quite big there. So this is all with the grey, and then we're going to go back into the cobalt blue in a minute. So I can pick out a few more little bits, ripples with the grey. What you want is to fade the grey out. So just gradually deplete it into the background. I'm going to give my brush a rinse. I'm going to pick up some cobalt blue. With both of these, you don't want them to be too strong. You don't want stripy water. You want the shadow in the water. Okay, so I can start now towards this background section, and I can keep the flat of the brush doing the horizontal stroke. So the further away, the flatter this is going to look. So just pick up a little bit of detail. Less is more. I say this all the time. Less is more. A little bit down there. So if I bring this in a bit, we can just see the flatness there. So just a horizontal stroke. Not too strong a colour. You can bring some ripples. It takes some practice to sort of get this wave action, but once you've got it, makes it quite easy with a small flat. You can just slightly rock the brush like that. That works quite well. As you're hitting, slightly rock. That creates that nice sort of wave effect. It's like a twizzle of the brush. And you can come through where you've got the grey, as long as that's still not wet, you can come through and create the ripples, and it's going to blend that through. So when you get to these bits, I just want you to concentrate where you can see the dark and the light. So that you're getting those darker sections in. Then you've got a few little bits sweeping through this water here. Come back out, you can't see that. So just a few little bits. It's not so much the ripples, you're just pulling out the shadow. Then if you pick up around number 6, a bit more of your grey, you can start to come in and just create, because there's a bit of frothiness as well, so like a bubbling motion in places, so just dotting on. You can create a few bubbly bits. You don't want too much of this, but the trick is to get these darker bits in before you take the masking fluid off, so you've got those darker shadows. So a few bubbly bits. I want this to be a bit darker here. Take a bit more in there. And what's really nice for just a dry edge is just to come along this one. Just very slightly catching the beach, but mainly being on the masking fluid, just in places. That gives a really nice shadow. Just in places. Concentrate on that sort of bottom third. Wrong way. Make it a bit thicker towards this bottom edge. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I'm going to do a glaze now. So a glaze is a thin layer of watercolour that goes over a painted surface. So glazes, you always really want to do them on a cotton paper. You always want to make sure that the paper is totally dry. If you can leave it 24 hours and then come back to it the next day, the paint will be less likely to lift when you're coming over. But if you use a soft brush, you can usually do it. I'm doing it straight away, so we'll see what happens today. So this is a soft squirrel hair brush, and it shouldn't lift too much. It might lift a little bit. So what I've done is I've mixed up some more beach colour. I've made a little bit and put a little bit more burnt sienna in. So that's what I'm going to use, and I'm going to come back over my beach now. So you must make sure it's totally dry. I haven't taken the masking fluid off. And I'm just very carefully coming over the paint. I'm trying to only hit the water on a section once. Then I'm going to use this big brush still and dip into that paint. And then I'm coming over, and this is called a glaze. Now I've popped the water everywhere, but I don't want the paint to go everywhere because I want to try and keep the blue quite blue. So this is connecting the beach up. You can do a glaze anyway, you can do a glaze in any colour. It's quite nice to do an atmospheric one in the sky. This is just to bring those colours underneath together. So I'm being very careful, very gentle. I'm coming in. Must make sure you've got clean water, that's another must. You can see how that's bringing the surface together. Now I don't want to eliminate all of the blue. What I'm going to do is just rinse that wash brush off. I'll give it a good clean after, and I'm going to come down to my round number 10. Just pick up a little bit of this colour now, because I want to bring it in a bit further, and I just don't want it to, the bigger the brush the more chance it's got of exploding on the paper and just obliterating the blue that I've got there. So I still need that surface to feel quite connected. So if I don't bring some across here in the blue, I won't feel that connection all the way through in that synergy. It'll feel like I've just placed that on. I'm coming, bringing a little bit into the shadow. And just keep watching every area. Right, I'm rinsing my brush off, making sure it's nice and clean. It's damp but not wet. I've missed a bit of water here. You can see it drying, so rinse your brush off, damp, not wet, just touch that edge. An odd dry edge doesn't tend to matter. If you start to lose the blue a little bit, just dry, damp brush, just come through. It'll just lift it back out enough. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so that's dried now, and you can see the huge difference that's made. It's connected all that bit together. It's working really well as the flat of the bleach. You can see the reflection of the wet water area. Okay, I've got a little bit more of that glaze on my brush. This is now nice and dry. What I can do is just pop in a few of these shadows, just sweeping through where you've got indents. Less is more, so I don't want a huge amount. This will seem quite bold as you're coming on, but as it dries you'll hardly notice, but there'll be enough for you to see those indents. You can use any brush really to do this. It's just that I've still got some on my wash brush, so I thought I'd use it. Okay, and let that dry off and take the masking fluid off. Okay, so I've rubbed the masking fluid off and it doesn't look too bad. Sometimes masking fluid can look a bit blobby. Depending on what you've got, you might need to do a little bit more work. If I come right in here, look, these ones at the back are quite blobby. So what I've got is a little bit of watered down cobalt blue on my brush, and I'm just going to break through. So just so that it's not so obvious a blob. So you can just narrow those in a little bit. You can do some dabbing just to make it look a little bit more bubbly. But it's just breaking up that edge a little bit really. Come back out. So just any bits that you think, oh, that looks a bit thick, just break in either with dabs or a little bit of shadow. Make sure that it's quite light, that you don't go too blue. Again, it doesn't want to look stripy, it just wants to look like it's a little bit of shadow on the foam really. So just this watered down cobalt blue is perfect. You can bring some lines through this front section as well if you want. As a rule of thumb, you want less white in the background, more white as you come towards the front. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Hope you've enjoyed this week. See you next week. Bye.